Hey folks, Steve here with a very special video for you today. We are doing an introduction for Arracourt, or maybe it's Arracourt. I am terrible with French names, as is known. But this is an entry in the Battalion Combat Series from MMP, and I have things set up here on the table. Now, I do have to give a little preamble here, rather than just get right to play, which is why this is an introduction video, much like I have for other series that I've covered, or series of videos for games that I have covered. Why I'm doing this, in terms of my coverage schedule, is because I have a game convention I am attending in really not very far away, just a few weeks, some handfuls of weeks away, and I will be playing for a very good chunk of the time Panzer's Last Stand, which is another entry in the BCS system. Now, I've played Panzer's Last Stand before. I'd like to think that I am capable of playing BCS. I've read the rules a number of times, but it's been like a year probably since I've last played BCS. I played Panzer's Last Stand last year, um, at the same convention and got to have fun with that. We're playing it again with a slightly different set of people. And I feel like I'm rusty. So I figured probably the best way to deal with that is to play Arracourt. And the benefit of this is that this game was intended to be a good entry point for the system. It's a single mapper, and in fact, in comparison to other games in the series, the hexes are bigger, the counters are bigger. So in terms of just like getting rolling, you're functionally dealing with fewer units and hexes than maybe some of the larger games like Last Blitzkrieg, Panzer's Last Stand, or even the newer Valley of Tears, which I have on the shelf behind me. So I am doing this. It means I'm functionally delaying my coverage of Axis Empires Ultimate Edition. But the choice to prioritize this playthrough is purely to get me warmed up for an opposed game at a convention coming up, and I want to take the time to refamiliarize myself with the mechanics. So what I've done is I've set up what is the campaign game scenario 5.1 of this game. So I believe I have everything set up, and now I'm nervous because it's like, oh gosh, yeah, this has been a while. Um, Couple of callouts. This series is not going to be like a learn to play. I'm not going to teach you how to play BCS. I think there are other videos that are out there that do a very good job of doing that sort of thing. I know there's been various levels of coverage by other YouTube channels on this series. I don't know that I'm necessarily going to be able to, uh, do the level of effort required to teach you. There are other ways to do that besides just reading the rulebook. And in fact, I do have a recommendation of a series of videos that I do think is very helpful in understanding the way the game mechanics all relate to each other. If you search in YouTube for RVT War Games, I assume the RVT means like R versus T. I don't know. That is a channel where if you go to that guy's channel and you go to the playlist, he has a BCS playlist. I do recommend watching those videos if you're just interested in understanding how to play. I'm going to make references to rules and I'm going to mention kind of how things work, but done in an informal way that's not a here's how you learn to play the game. So you'll have to bear with me if you are new to this series and you want to catch up. Go watch those RVT War Games videos. Those will be very helpful to you. I also want to mention that I am using the I'm not sure what you want to call them, HQ display cards that a acquaintance over the internet, Chris Houston, was providing at a very low cost to me. That he had fashioned up, and you could order online these somewhere. I don't have a good link handy any longer, but they're very nice, quality, durable little cards. You could print out these sort of like little sheets, and I had done that. I had printed out sheets. I had put them in these little sleeves that were just the right size for little cards like this. But then eventually, Chris Houston had made these available, and I ended up buying them. And I have a set for all my BCS games except for Valley of Tears, and they're really quite nice. They do seem like they're durable. They can be put under some bending punishment and be no worse for wear. Um, and so that works out very, very well uh, for me. The idea behind these cards, if you're not familiar with, is without the cards, they don't come with the game. You'd have to go to Board Game Geek if you were going to print them. But the conceit here is that if you weren't playing with them, you would have to put a lot of these additional administrative markers on or near an HQ on the map, and that gets very cluttered very, very fast. So the idea is you have these cards and you just keep them reasonably nearby the formation, usually probably behind your front line, where they're a little bit out of the way, but they're close by. So, like here for the CCA Fourth Armor, their formation is basically here with one unit or a couple units way up the way. And you adjust the camera here. They're up here, but this whole little formation right there, I have the card nearby, so I can see that that formation has uh, a fatigue level of 2, and they have an artillery point, and I don't have any units in support at the moment. So you just kind of you can look at that as a quick reference because of the way this game models the combat level of battalions. You have things like support, so you'll have armor, and there's two different ways to have the armor. You can have them as a quote unquote real unit on the map. So an example of that would be like here. This unit is on the map as a real unit to operate armor unit. Um, or it can be in again support, and so the idea being that you take that unit off the map. It is placed on the card in that box, and basically, like every other unit, your infantry or whatever you have, has some complement of either armor or tank destroyers or assault guns or whatever, and those provide different bonuses and protections to those units without going very deeply into all the different mechanics. It's called support. So you have this distributed support to units, and hits a nice little medium scale effect. Like I think of games where you kind of you handle that as like a track. That's the OSS system from Compass. That's a weird different abstraction of these types of things. I like this system very well because you still have a tangible counter that you're deciding, is it distributed or is it condensed? And to divorce you from any misunderstanding, uh, having a unit in support is a very, very good thing. But it's not a bad thing to have a real unit. But what you need to understand is like you can concentrate for certain purposes, and that's great. And maybe there's a particular reason why you're going to concentrate your armor into a real unit to go do something specific. But having a unit in support, and this certainly depends on what kind of support you have, and there's a variety. There's red, which I kind of think of as like a hard armor, like actually offensive armor. There's limited support, so red support, limited support, and standoff support. Limited just ends up being things more like tank destroyers, which are more defensive in nature. That's the easiest way to explain it without going into too much detail. So those things really matter. They matter on how the real units on the map act. So even this mechanized infantry unit by itself is not necessarily having an armor value to do armor activities or armor associated activities, but with support, they can be protected from enemy armor to a degree and force your support to fend off the enemy's support. It's kind of a weird way. I'm not describing this very well. Again, I got to point you to other videos. So if this is really bouncing off of you, please pause this video, come back later, go watch the RVT videos. So the idea when you have these armor units, whether again they're tank destroyers or they're literal tank armor units in support, that does represent a combined arms type of situation. And so if you look at the whole series of games, my understanding is, and some of this is covered in the Arracourt design notes, you can have some U.S. forces that can't put units into support. They have to be real units, and that is kind of an not flexible position to be in. In this game, you can have there in some cases the support units for a given formation can be in support, and in some cases they I don't think they can, or you have limited capability to do it. And then finally, you have in last Blitzkrieg, the U.S. Army is now much more attuned to combined warfare, and you have a lot more flexibility to pull those support units in and out. So here we're almost to that stage. There'll be a few restrictions along the way. The Germans will certainly have all sorts of support units that they'll be leveraging. That it's just a neat little element. It's something very different. The system does very different things. I think when I did my report out of the last convention, I talked about how BCS really wowed me because it did so many different things, but they really felt good. Like in the moment, once you understand how things work, it feels really good on the map to play that through and to understand the allocations, and knowing that we are a more zoomed in level of detail, right? So if you think of OCS, which this game is some cousin to or distant cousin via Dean Essig being the designer, um, where if you were looking at it like a Google Maps, well, this BCS system is a couple scroll clicks into a more zoomed in view, and you just get a different fidelity level in how units interact and how they operate. And the big thing in the system being not to simply think about individual counters that you're moving, but the entire formation. So this entire formation operating as one large unit on the map. How does it operate? How do they support each other? What is that whole formation doing as a distinct uh, entity? And the fact that you're moving counters around within that entity is a more tactical consideration, but you have to think in big terms of what is that formation doing, where is it going, where is it in relation to its peers, because what you don't want to have happen is to screw up the supply lines and the command situation. You don't win by piling up a bunch of guys in one place, or distinct formations all in one place, because things get confused. We don't have omniscient capability for command and control. And this game reflects that. You start to have overlapping formations. It's going to be much harder to get those folks to operate effectively. There are exceptions to that. There's a buddies mechanic where certain formations, like in this game, the fourth armor formations basically are buddies, meaning they don't really tangle each other up. They're not problematic. But any other formation that may come in, like, say, the sixth armor over here, could potentially cause some problems for them. And you got to watch out of where your reinforcements are coming. Do they have a clear sort of supply line behind the combat train uh, without major traffic issues? So it handles these realities in a very eloquent way, but without being exhaustive. And in fact, if you're really curious about the system as it relates to OCS, or if you were ever wishing to criticize OCS, I think the very best essay that you could write that argues against the supply system of OCS actually comes from BCS. In the support book, there's design notes about the system, and kind of refutes the value of the OCS supply system, which is very funny to think about. And that's not to say that OCS is a bad system at all, just that at a different level of scale, you need to abstract and represent things differently. At an OCS scale, where you're more zoomed out, you can kind of assume that, okay, yes, I am going to allocate the supply, and I do expect that the leaders down at that lower level are making use of the supply properly. So the whole management of combat trains, right, that's below the level of focus of OCS. But likewise, the inverse at the BCS level, you're not worried about getting supply points. The commanders above, are allocating enough supply. You just need to make sure that you are making sure they have clear, efficient routes for the supply to get to the guys, and that there's no major traffic jams from that perspective. So it's it's an interesting flip on it, and it makes the system, I think, very accessible in a way that OCS is not, because when you show it with an OCS game and folks see the bean counting of supply points, that can be a big turnoff for people. Here, you don't need to worry about that, but you still feel very immersed in the mechanics and the way things operate. So something something to enjoy there. The other thing I want to mention is, if you are a a gear person or a mech person, as a fan of history, what's really fun in the rule book is the different types of armor units. So when you say, like, okay, well, we have this armor unit in this game of this value, well, what are we even talking about here? Well, the game system does come with a reference if you're interested in that level of detail. Like, okay, here's your hard red armor units. Um, well, in Baptism by Fire, Last Blitzkrieg, and Panzer's Last Stand, you're going to potentially see the M475 Sherman, and that's a 3 armor value with a range of 2, with a 5 or 14 movement allowance based on what side it's on, and describing that that's your typical U.S. medium tank battalion. And there's that level of detail for just everything. So if you're really curious, if it's not clear on a given counter, like, well, what is that? What are we talking about here? What kind of equipment are we talking about? Um, there's that nice little lookup table. I think that's a fun detail. It's cool to be able to say, okay, I know what that armor actually is. In game terms, I just know it's an armor unit. I need to know that this unit has an armor value, is a hard unit with a yellow box, its efficiency rating, its tactical rating, its armor value on either side, and its range. That's all great. It's excellent. But if I really wanted to know what that was, I could look that up, which is good. So I think that's enough about the general BCS system. There's all kinds of little things in here. Artillery points are used for different things. They can either support a combat by providing modifiers, or you can take a chance and try to cause step losses with them directly, which is a very valuable way to use them, particularly on units that are low in step number. You can basically shatter and eliminate units doing that quite well. There's also, and it's like I have one example in the shot right now of a unit in screen mode, which when we played Panzer's Last Stand last year, I didn't really, we didn't really do that. I can't remember if we did. I don't recall us doing it, so I have to be a little familiar with the screen mechanic. Basically, certain recon units, or like light armored cars, those sorts of units, can become screen units, which I sort of interpret as like that unit is even more dispersed than we might think, and is effectively covering a wide area and limiting, truly effectively screening that area from enemy advance, or slowing them down. And you can't really destroy or chase down that unit very easily because it is technically dispersed, I think, is the right way to interpret that, right? Whatever size a unit this is, it looks like it's a, I can't tell, battalion potentially. Looks like a battalion. That battalion is spread out across these hexes essentially, or at least that's my interpretation of that. So there's some mechanics I need to be very careful of. I'm not as used to playing with, but still, I think this is a good place to start, and a good place to start for anybody. What's really interesting with this product of uh, Arracourt is that you might think, well, hey, this is a smaller game. It's a beginner's game. Like, maybe there's just the one scenario, but no, there's actually several. So you have the full campaign that runs 13 turns through September 18th through September 30th of the actions of the campaign. But you then have a a shortened version of that only runs 5 turns as a medium length. You have the Battle of Luneville, which is a small 2 turn scenario that only uses like half the map. And then you've got a few other medium length scenarios that start things off further along, another small campaign, a small sort of scenario. So a few mediums, a few smalls in the campaign game, which is more than I would have thought. Maybe maybe you'd have like one small and then the campaign. They really put some effort in to provide multiple ways to start and play the scenario or to play the game, which is cool. I figured I'd just go with the campaign because I'm gonna have probably enough time to try to play through this as much as I can, and then ideally be complete with the scenario ahead of my convention in a few weeks. So that's the idea, anyway. Now, I do also have the formation cards set up for units for formations that are not yet on the map, just to kind of save myself some pain. So I've put the cards near where they would reinforce. And as it pertains to this particular scenario, there are basically 2 whole formations that are off map for the Germans. You can see them up to the top of your screen, top of your window, your view. Those can come in whenever the German player wants them to. They're sort of like strategic, more strategic reserve of forces to launch the offensive. Because while you can see that there's a lot of U.S. units on the map and maybe not so many Germans, technically, this scenario or this campaign really starts off with a German attack, a German offensive. And so historically, that started and focused on Luneville, which is the subject of one of the smaller scenarios. And I guess the historical path, as best as I can understand it, glancing through the book, the design notes and historical notes, is that those 2 formations get thrown at Luneville. So the existing formation on the map for the Germans, which is the 15th Panzer Group Division, is there to operate, but then we're going to surge in Germans to try to attempt to take Luneville, and then there will be other German reinforcements that come on the map eventually from down here as well as up here. The key objective being to force combat losses, because the Germans would like to exhaust the American effort. So there's victory points at stake around combat losses and tracking combat losses. So we'll need to watch out for that. And then there's control of 3 critical victory point spaces. So one is Chateau Saline, which is right over here. I've used my red bingo chits to help orient around that. So there's a static formation of the Germans here defending that. They'll probably get pushed out of the way pretty easily. There is Arracourt itself, which is currently under control of U.S. forces. And then there is Luneville, which I believe the Americans are considered to be in control of that right now based on the unit positions on the map. So the Germans are going to have to take those back. Like, they're going to have to take Luneville back. They're going to have to try to take Arracourt back. And whatever else they can within reasonable capability to win the game across the 13 turns. Likewise, the Americans are going to be opposing that, just trying to do the opposite effectively. The beginning part of this campaign is interesting because there are some really weird unit positions. So if I just go from west to east, or well, from north to south, technically, because the way the map is oriented up here is north. We have the CCB, the 4th Armor, that are gonna take this victory hex, right? They don't have much to do but do that and to kind of hold the positions here. While we see the CCA of the 4th Armor, already in control of Arracourt. They need to maintain control, but they also have those screening units, and then this armor unit that's like way out there, maybe overextended, just out in the middle of nowhere, which we're gonna have to watch out for. And then you have the CCR formation of the 4th Armor, which is just coming up behind the 2nd Cavalry Group. And again, a kind of a not great situation in my opinion. Like the combat train is right nearby a German unit, and I believe these guys can come in here and jump that combat train. I think I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that to be the case. So I'm not sure what can be done to solve that. And then the HQ's up really far across this river, um, not terribly far from some German units, and then a number of uh, American forces are screening this forest up in the north, which again the position of these units is real oddball. There's also a screen up here, so several screens of the cavalry, but the HQ is kind of in a weird position. Usually, if you get an HQ jumped by a attack capable unit, it simply has to retreat, is what usually happens. But retreating would start to cause all sorts of goofy problems for the Americans over here. So I can definitely see where if we committed our strategic reserves of the Germans over here, we would definitely put a lot of pressure on the U.S. And then the compensating factor is that there are going to be the 106th Cavalry Group, the 79th Infantry Division, and these French forces that are coming up over here that are going to help offset that. So the rate of reinforcements, and I've got the reinforcements over here on the turn track, kind of strewn about. We're going to come in, and it's going to feel like there's a lot going on as these guys enforce in a more open game where I'm not playing myself, right? If I were just the German player, I could optionally pick those two reinforcement formations and send them somewhere else. I don't have to send them to Luneville. I could cause a bunch of pressure in the north. I could cause pressure in the central area and go for Arracourt itself. The existing 15th Panzer Group division is kind of in this weird spot where they're kind of holding the central area, defended here and then anchored on the river at the river crossings or in multiple river crossings. Um, so I'm not sure what else what can they do? Where can they apply pressure? They're clearly holding some good spots so that the U.S. can't cross into those regions and cause problems. I'm uncertain of the full attack capability of this formation. They do have some red armor in support. So let me see if I can. So you have some Jagdpanzers here uh, that are in support and provide some valuable capability there. So I need to think about how that's going to work. Their combat train is way up here, over on the east part of the map. And the HQ is in the middle of the forest. So they're running uh, their supply lines are kind of coming out from the HQ. There are roads, and it's not too hard to imagine, what their supply situation, the focal point of the HQ, and then through this trail road back to the combat train. The rest of the U.S. formations all have very reasonable supply path tracing as well. The other thing I would mention is that there's a special rule for the Fourth Armor, which is their combat trains have to be on these highlighted roads. So there's usually the white is a primary road, but these white roads here also have this faint outline of yellow, which just indicates that they're special roads and that the armor formations have to have their combat trains on those special roads to maintain supply. So a couple of weird restrictions there. Yeah, so there's a lot to that I need to keep in mind. And then this particular game does incorporate weather. So every turn I'm going to roll for weather, and that may affect visibility, which can affect the way that the armor units engage with each other. The real, I guess, the wash, rinse, repeat process that you want to be executing with your formations is basically as you activate a formation, use units. If you have any hard, red armor, use your armor to approach the enemy, your target infantry that you'd like to defeat, let's say. And then you have your armor unit do something called an engagement. And in that engagement, you basically roll off to see if you cause let's say it's the infantry units, your target, if you cause the support there, the mechanized armor forces that are supporting that unit to be quote unquote dropped, meaning you are in that firing armor engagement. Um, you are forcing those forces to retreat, leaving the infantry uh, to lack that support, either temporarily, just for that next activate, during the course of that activation, or more permanently under certain circumstances, which means the given unit can get no support. Other units in the formation maybe can still keep its support, but not that one particular unit, let's say. If you can drop support, hey, great. And if you still have actions left with your armor unit, you could be looking to do um, an attack by fire, which is like a direct fire on that infantry, which is a chance to cause step losses. And then the potential follow up. So let's say your first unit, the first counter you move as part of that formation, managed to do all of that. Well, then your follow up units that you've activated are going to approach that infantry and set up for an actual attack that will be maybe more beneficial because now they don't have armor protection. Maybe you've chipped away a few steps from direct fire, and now you can potentially do a more convincing attack on that particular infantry unit. And then you can potentially, with your red armor units, do what's effectively like an overrun attack, where um, it's a mobile assault kind of attack. So there's sort of a softening mechanic, a softening procedure that isn't. I guess it almost feels like a no-brainer. Like you certainly want to be doing that every time you're wanting to make gains in a particular part of the map, or you're trying to attrit away an enemy formation. You need to be thinking about dropping support, attack by fire, and then assaulting that position. And it's a 1, 2, 3 type of thing. That's the order of operations you probably want to work in, depending on the situation at hand. Um, and in the course of some of those engagements, the enemy support units, armor, tank destroyers, whatever, may also take step losses. So you can start to trit that away until eventually maybe that formation no longer has support at its disposal and becomes more brittle over time. It's all those sorts of things that mix into this system that makes it really interesting. And you can kind of almost imagine the narrative of what's happening in your mind, right? Like, okay, we have Shermans engaging Panzers, or maybe there's your Stug uh, formations there, and you just it starts to appear in your mind just what is actually happening. Um, and I remember thinking that through when I had some German units attack a Russian armor unit in some very tough, hilly, foresty terrain where the armor didn't have as many bonuses, and that sort of came to life in my mind. So the game's very good about that. This system's good about that, and I'm excited to see where we go from here. So that's just the intro, folks. There's certainly more things I could talk about. I could talk about how you need to keep track of steps with these big old bag of other markers underneath units as they begin to take losses. So the stacks start to get a little bit bigger over time. There's a lot of different things we could talk through, but fortunately, I can say the majority of the game specific special rules we've sort of talked to. There's not that many more. And I think in the next video, we can just get started. I need to familiarize myself with the activation cadence. There's some interesting oddball things I need to watch out for. But the general way I'm going to play this is I will have each player in my brain select their formation to activate. I'm not going to use chip pull, though that's an option if you choose to use it. I'm just going to pick the activations. And I'll need to remember that when I go to play Panzer's Last Stand here in a few weeks, that Panzer's Last Stand incorporates specialized rules around the activation process. So I need to. I'll just need to keep in mind I got to do some familiarity freshening on that stuff in the weeks to come. Anyway, see you in the next one, guys. In the next video, we're gonna do turn one. Depending on how much I choose to show at what level of detail, it may only be turn one or parts of turn one. And then we'll seek to incorporate more turns into each subsequent video until we get through turn 13. So you can imagine turns 5, 6, 7 may all be one video as I cover this in more abbreviated format. But maybe for the first turn or two, we'll talk about more of what we're trying to achieve with the units on the map and where they get to. So thanks for watching. Hope this was interesting and informative. We'll get underway in the next one. Take care. Keep on game.